Right, well, hello everyone. Thank you for coming to this panel. The panel is titled Immigration Reform, the Challenge to Get It Right. And indeed, that is the challenge. My name is Robert Gittleson. I am the president of a group called Conservatives for Comprehensive Immigration Reform. And full disclosure, as it turns out, all the panelists here are members of Conservatives for Comprehensive Immigration Reform. And so what I'm thinking we'll do today is each of us will speak for a little while. There's a few things that we want to just talk about from the heart. But I wanted to purposely have us only use maybe about half the time to say what we want to say, because this is a very complicated and very contentious issue. And I would love to open this up for discussion amongst ourselves. We have this nice, small, cozy group. And just have a conversation between ourselves about what this legislation would be about, how it would affect the country, and what it means and why we should do it. Just up front, we all believe in comprehensive immigration reform. The immigration system that we have right now is just simply not functioning properly. It's antiquated. The bill that was written in 1986 and signed by President Reagan had good intentions, but there were some mistakes in how that bill was crafted, but more importantly, mistakes were made in how it was implemented. And we got into a situation where we couldn't really fix the system. It just perpetuated upon itself problems that got worse and worse over time. If I were to look at that bill and say, what was the main problem with that bill that led us to a situation that we have now, where we have 11 million people or so living without papers, without proper documentation here, I would say, well, why did that happen? Well, there are several reasons why that happened. But I think if we look at the fundamental root cause of why we have so much illegal immigration in this country right now, is because the 1986 bill did not provide a free market economy situation that would allow immigration to fluctuate so that when our economy was doing well and we needed more workers, we could legally get them. And so, of course, what happened over the course of 20 years, or now it's 27 years, our free market economy needed to grow, and it did grow. And thank God for that. I mean, I'm a retired businessman. I'm a capitalist. I believe in our free market economy. It's the best situation for growth in the economy in the entire world. But immigration plays a part in it. It always has in this country. Our country was built on immigration, but there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it. And while coming illegally is the wrong way to do it, as your own senator, Marco Rubio, who we all know well, I guess Carlos has been trying to meet with him and hasn't been able to meet with him, but Dr. Land and I and Barrett have met with him in several occasions and worked with him on this issue. He understands it. He gets it. He's trying to help craft a bill based on his conservative principles, which is what we all share. And so what we're going to try and do now is we're going to try and see if we can't craft a new bill that takes care of a few of the different problems that we have in the current system. I want to start by telling you where I'm coming from on this, because I live in Los Angeles, which is really kind of ground zero of the illegal immigration problem in this country. There are probably 2 or 3 million undocumented people living just in Los Angeles. And one thing that you don't really hear about is that when we say we have 11 million undocumented people in this country, well, that's probably true, but it goes deeper than that. They have 5 million citizen children. There are several million legal spouses of these undocumented people. Probably altogether we're looking at something closer to 20 million people that are impacted by this, that are living very desperate lives. in the shadows. We say they're living in the shadows. I say they're living in the shadows of the American dream, because they came here seeking the American dream and they can't pursue it. They're sort of stuck in limbo. And it's really kind of worse than limbo, because they're living in fear. And morally, this is not right. We're better than that as a country. We need to find a solution for how we could bring these people out of the shadows. And I say, quite honestly, we're not going to deport them. I mean, we're just not. The politicians have said that we're not. We couldn't do it if we wanted to do it, because they're just too important to our economy in so many ways, because they do jobs that many Americans cannot or will not do. They're not going to pick fruit for $8 an hour, in the hot sun or in the desert. It's not going to happen. And so what we need to do is we need to find a way to, first of all, figure out who these people are. And I want to tell you that in California, in our churches in Los Angeles, every single week, we're praying for a new family that is going through a situation where they're being torn apart. One of the people in their families are being deported. And it is an extreme crisis for a family to have to go through this situation. It's a terrible thing. And I see it every day in my community. I'm retired. I don't need to do this. But I see it in my community every day. It's this huge problem. And I'm trying to find a solution that's fair and just, but also responsible, so that we can not only solve the problem for now, but so that we can solve the problem going forward. And so this legislation that we're trying to craft right now, and that's been crafted, I think, pretty well in the Senate, at least it's a good start. And your Senator, Marco Rubio, is very instrumental in this. He is basically saying, look, I understand why the people came here. He has said, if I was in their situation in Mexico and I couldn't feed my kids, I would look to come over the border myself. And if I couldn't do it legally, I would do it illegally. So I understand where they're coming from. I've been to all these countries, well, many of the countries that these people come from. I've seen terrible things in these countries, corruption and working conditions that are really very subhuman. And I can understand, and I have compassion for these people. But we're a nation of sovereign laws. We need to be able to have self-determination in this country, who we allow to come here and who's not. We can't just have anybody coming whenever they want to come. So what Marco Rubio has said is, look, we'll find a way to first screen these people. If they're good people, they've settled in this country, they have roots in this country, they have paid their taxes, they have a clean criminal record, these people should find a way to be able to stay. And he's gone further and said, we can even someday, after a rigorous path, allow them to have an opportunity to have citizenship, which is something that, frankly, all of us here on this panel believe is the American values thing to do. We should have a subclass of people. They should have an opportunity to have citizenship. And Marco Rubio's talking about a 13-year path. That's harsh. That's a tough road. They're going to have to keep their noses clean, pay their taxes, do everything the right way, and then maybe they can have it. But, that's kind of a fair deal, I think. But what he's saying is we're not going to allow them to get into this citizenship line until we have determined for sure, no fooling around, we have seriously taken steps to absolutely do our best to secure the border, and more than that, to secure the workplace, so that any single employee in this country from this date forward would have to pass a check that says, yes, this person is legally entitled to work in the United States. It's a system called E-Verify. Right now, it's just a voluntary thing that maybe 5% of the country is doing. But he has determined that if we're going to give these people an opportunity to get right with the law and have an opportunity to someday earn citizenship, we're going to hold the Democrats' feet to the fire and say, okay, we'll give you that, but you have to give us secure borders and a secure workplace. And if and when it's determined that that has been done, only then would we allow for an opportunity to people to move on to the citizenship track. And I would just say one more thing, and then I want to introduce this very illustrious panel. we're gonna be in a situation where the House and the Senate are going to look at this a little bit differently. The Senate has come up with what I think is a pretty reasonable compromise, and they've thought out and well-reasoned how this should be done. The House is a little more conservative, and they're going to come up with a little bit more of a conservative bill than what the Senate has proposed. I met with the chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the House the other day. His name is Bob Goodlatte from Virginia. Very good guy, a very conservative guy. And he has basically said, look, the Senate came out with a bill, and that's great, and there's some things that I like about it. He's calling it a starting point. He's saying that what he's going to do is he's going to look to make some amendments to that bill. But he promised us, he said, look, I'm not going to amend this bill to kill it. I'm going to amend this bill to make it better. And maybe after we've all had a chance to talk a little bit, we can talk about what might make this process work and what might make it a little bit better. All right, so I want to introduce my friends and my colleagues here. And I guess I'll start with you, Richard. Everybody has the biographies in their books, so they know our biographies. But Dr. Land is the president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention. He is soon to be retiring from that, but going on to some bigger and better things. Maybe he'll talk about that, hopefully. But he has been a true champion working with us, meeting with members of Congress, the administration, and he's really just been a very courageous voice for many years, just speaking truth to power, as they say, and talking about why we need to do this from a moral perspective and from a political perspective. And I think maybe he'll talk about that a little bit today. Dr. Land.
Thank you. I am going to be going to a new position. I'm going to be, as of July 1st, I will be the president of Southern Evangelical Seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina. If you want to know more about that, you can go to ses.edu. And I'm going to do my best to train Green Berets and paratroopers for God's Army. But on the immigration issue, first of all, I'm for immigration reform. I have been for immigration reform. We need to remember that President George Bush ran on an immigration reform platform in 2000, and it got derailed by 9/11. He worked for comprehensive immigration reform and for better conditions on the Texas border when he was governor of Texas. And I need to say that being a Texan on this issue does make a difference. Texas has had a different experience than any other of the border states. The idea that you would have a demonstration where people were carrying Mexican flags and holding banners that said we didn't cross the border crossed us, as they did in Los Angeles, is incomprehensible in Texas. It would never occur to anyone to do that. Because, I grew up in Houston. 25% of my class was Hispanic. Most of them were in Spanish class with me, trying to learn Spanish because their parents wouldn't let them speak it at home because they wanted them to learn how to speak English. And they spoke sort of standard English. They spoke Texas English like I do. Yeah. As I began to deal with this issue after 2001, and particularly after 2005, as the head of the Ethics Commission, I wanted to help Southern Baptists and other Christians deal with this issue from a Christian perspective. We're citizens of two kingdoms. We're citizens of the United States. The Bible tells us in Romans 13 that God ordained the government to reward those who obey the law and to punish those who break the law. Our government hasn't been doing that on the immigration issue for 27 years now. The last president who actually seriously enforced the immigration laws was Dwight David Eisenhower. And yes, these people have broken the law either by crossing the border illegally or by overstaying their visas. But it's also immoral not to enforce the law for 27 years and then say you're going to enforce the law retroactively. The example I use would be like the government sending me a letter saying, Richard, we've been monitoring your driving habits on the interstate highways for the last 27 years, and we know that we haven't ever given you a ticket, but we have noted every time you exceeded the speed limit. And then they would, and we've attached a date and a notation for every time that you've done this. We've monitored this from the satellites, and it would be a very, very long list. And then they would say, we're now going to give you, we're going to fine you for every time you've broken the speed limit. And by the way, we're going to confiscate your car until you pay the fine. Now, I don't think most Americans would think that would be very fair.
No.
But that's exactly what we're saying to people who have been here, in some cases 25 years or more, have planted their lives here. And let's be honest. For the last quarter century, we've had two signs up at the border. One says, no trespassing. The other one says, help wanted. And these people have come here, and they have worked, and they have often gotten married and have children here. And these people live in constant fear of getting up and going to work in the morning and being picked up and sent to a deportation center before they can go home to their families. It's really, and they are prey to people who exploit them because they know that they can't go to the law. And it's really an intolerable situation. And it's not how we as Americans should treat people. On the other side of the coin, we're also citizens of the kingdom of heaven. And we're told to welcome the stranger. We're told to give a cup of cold water in Jesus' name. We're to do unto others as we'd have them do unto us. We're to love our neighbors as ourselves. And so how do we reconcile these two things? I think that what we do is we come up with a comprehensive immigration reform package that says, yes, you have broken the law. You have to acknowledge that you've broken the law. You have to come forward and register. You have to pay a fine. You have to undergo a criminal background check, make sure that you haven't broken the law either in the United States or your country of origin. You need to agree, if you want to stay here and be a citizen, you need to learn to read, write, and speak English and pass a test that you've done so. By the way, I don't find any Hispanics who object to that. The only people who object to that are having coffee in faculty lounges in liberal universities. Hispanics understand. They want to learn English. They understand that the key to the American dream is learning to speak standard English. Now, the pathway, optimistically, is 13 years. Until the trigger takes place, if it takes 4 years for the trigger to come into place that the border is secure, it would be 17 years before they could reach citizenship under the current system. That's not amnesty. Amnesty is what Jimmy Carter gave the draft dodgers who went to Canada instead of serving in the military during Vietnam. He let them come home with no penalty, no probation, no anything. Now, I would have let them come home, but they would have had to agree to spend 2 years working at minimum wage in veterans hospitals, taking care of the guys who took their places.
Yeah.
Now, and Senator Rubio has been the absolutely key player. He's been the indispensable person on this. He has held Chuck Schumer and Richard Durbin's feet to the fire, and that's a considerable task. And he has said to them, unless this bill meets my minimum requirements, I'm walking away. And everybody knows if he walks away, it's done. It's over. This bill is a good starting place. It does really, I think, secure the border. McCain says he thinks that it will secure the border. It secures the workplace, without which you cannot secure the border. As long as the magnet of jobs is there, they're going to come. They'll find a way around any security you put up. But if they can't get jobs when they get here, they're not going to come. And this will pretty much make it impossible for them to get jobs because the penalties on the employers are such that it will stop them. Now, Robert asked me to also speak a little bit about the politics of this. Now, let me be very clear about this. I'm for comprehensive immigration reform because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing for the country. But it's also absolutely essential unless the Republican Party wants to go the way of the dodo. If the Republican Party wants to die and become the Whig Party, then all they've got to do is continue to alienate Hispanics.
That's right. That's right.
I was ashamed of my party, and I am a Republican. I was ashamed of my party when the audience, I think it was here in Florida, booed Governor Rick Perry when he defended in-state tuition for the children of undocumented workers. These children are the innocent victims here. They did not bring themselves here. They were brought here by their parents. And I don't think we want to be a country that punishes children for their parents' indiscretions. That bill, when it passed in Texas, was so uncontroversial that only 5 legislators voted against it. It's virtually impossible to get all but 5 Texas state legislators to agree the sun came up. But all but 5 of them voted for in-state tuition for the children of undocumented workers because it was good for these children, it was good for Texas, it was good for the economy, and it was the right thing to do. For the first time in this last election, Hispanics made up 10% of the voting population. They'll make up 12% in the next election. They'll make up 14% in the next election. And by 2050, they're going to make up 28% of the electorate. If the Republican Party continues to act as if it doesn't want Hispanics here, and it doesn't like Hispanics, it will condemn itself to being a minority party, unable to win an election at the national level in your lifetime or mine. Now, the Hispanic culture is a pro-family, pro-life, pro-religious, pro-entrepreneurial culture. Anybody who's been exposed to it knows that. When Rush says that you're creating 11 million new Democrat voters, it shows you that Rush needs to get out more, and particularly he needs to be a little more exposed to the Hispanic culture. If you read, I would encourage every one of you to read the last week's cover story in Time magazine on the Latino Revolution. And you know, there are about 9 million Hispanic evangelicals now. It's one of the fastest growing religious groups in the country. And they are more conservative on the abortion issue, and more conservative on the same-sex marriage issue, and more conservative on virtually every other issue than white evangelicals are. We don't have to get 80% of the Hispanic vote, but we do need to get 40 to 50% of it if we're going to be a competitive party. Unless you want to turn the country over to Hillary Clinton and whoever clones we have of Obama and Hillary in the future, we've got to get this right.
Well, thank you, Richard. Thank you very much. Right, listen, I'd like to introduce my friend Barrett Duke, who is also from the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention.
And he's not retired.
He's not retired. And, you know,
As far as he knows.
Barrett has just been a wonderful friend and partner to me. I've been going to Washington about every month, sometimes twice a month for the last 3 years, to meet with primarily Republicans. I met with Democrats, I met with the administration, but mostly I've been trying to meet with Republicans and talk about this issue. Richard's been with me, Carlos has been with me, but Barrett lives in Washington and he goes with me all the time. We've probably gone to 100 meetings together, or maybe not, but close to it. And he has just been a prophetic voice. He sits in the room and when he speaks from authority. He speaks from the Bible. He knows what he's talking about, and people listen to him, and it's just been wonderful to work with him for these last few years. I'd like to introduce my friend Barrett Duke.
Thanks very much. First of all, I'll just ditto everything that Dr. Lance said, so I don't have to repeat any of that. Interestingly, years ago, at this point, I pretty much took the position that these folks were here illegally, that they had broken the law, They knew, even though they could cross the border, that there was a legal way to do that and an illegal way to do that. Then there were a whole bunch of other folks who overstayed their visas and decided to stay. They irritated me more than the folks who crossed the Rio Grande. I mean, those folks gave their word. Their word was, I'll stay here X number of days, and when those days are over, I'll go back home. I took that position. I just believed that one way or another, these folks needed to leave, and we needed to figure out how to help them leave. I think from the perspective of an offended citizen, that's an understandable perspective if you just think through that look through that one lens. But I'm also a Christian. I'm also a Bible-believing Christian. And I do believe that my allegiance is to the Lord before my allegiance is to the state.
Amen.
And so I had to ask myself, all right, that hard question, which we ask ourselves about many things, what would Jesus do? Jesus would obey his Father. Jesus would obey Scripture. So then I had to say to myself, okay, this is 2,000 years after the cross. There wasn't any nation, there wasn't any exactly similar circumstance like this for me to look at. How do I figure out how to take the Bible and actually learn something from it and how it would apply to this situation? And I started thinking about the New Testament, and I said, well, there are some passages there, but isn't there something that's a little more analogous? And then, the light bulb came on. Sometimes my lights don't light up very well, and it takes a little while for the filament to start to glow. And then it dawned on me that there was a nation that God was very involved with. There was the nation of Israel. And it was a nation like this nation. It had borders, it had a language, it had values, it had an economy, it had people who identified themselves as its citizens. So I thought, okay, let me just figure that Israel is a nation, the same way the United States is a nation. Is there anything that would help me in reading about Israel that might help me understand how I might have to, or be expected to, or even think about how to address the situation that we have today with 12 million folks who are here illegally? And so I started doing what every Christian ought to do, right? Reading their Bible. And I started reading my Bible. And it didn't take long for me as I got into the Bible and started reading about how God spoke to his people and how God addressed how his people were supposed to deal with each other, that I came across this passage in Leviticus. When a stranger resides with you in your land, you shall do him no wrong. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. And then he goes on to say, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt.
Chapter and verse?
Leviticus 19, verse 33. And I thought, okay, who are these strangers? Well, these strangers are not Israelites. They're not even citizens of this land. They're living there among these people, not even necessarily sharing their religion. And God says, love them like they love themselves. And this is God's chosen people. This is God's nation. This is God's land. I mean, if anybody is going to be concerned about what might be happening in a country, God would certainly be concerned about what's happening in his own land among his own people. And yet God didn't say drive those people out. God didn't say ostracize them. God didn't say marginalize them. God said love them like you love yourself. And when I thought about that, I said, well, I wouldn't do that to myself. I wouldn't drive myself out. I wouldn't ostracize myself. I wouldn't marginalize myself. I wouldn't keep myself in abject poverty or close to poverty. I wouldn't do that to myself. So I should treat the stranger like I would treat myself. And then, of course, you go into the New Testament and you have, for example, the story of the Samaritan, where the lawyer, the man who's interested and concerned about the rule of law, says, who is my neighbor? He says, how do I inherit eternal life? Jesus gives the answer, love your neighbor as yourself. And by the way, that word love, he says, love God and your neighbor as yourself. The same word that's used for loving God is the word that's used for loving your neighbor. You're supposed to love your neighbor the same way that you love God. And so the lawyer, being the lawyer that he is, says, okay, well, who is my neighbor? At that point, he's trying to whittle down the neighborhood. He's trying to say, okay, now who is it that I really have to love? And Jesus gives this story, and basically the answer is you have to love everybody. Everybody is your neighbor, and you have to love all of them. And, I understand these folks living here are my neighbor. And I'll take you through just one more little journey that I had to take on this because I have a PhD in Old Testament studies, okay? And I did my dissertation in a study of the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. And at the end of both Ezra and Nehemiah, there's this situation where both Ezra and Nehemiah break up these marriages to foreign women. And I said, oh man, now I have a dilemma. Because here are religious leaders breaking up marriages between Israelites and non-Israelites. How in the world do I factor that into this question? Well, fortunately, I know the biblical languages. I can read Hebrew, I can read Aramaic, I can read Greek. And so I said, all right, before I just assume that I know that you're not supposed to be getting involved in these relationships with these other people, let me read the original language. And it was interesting, when I read the original language, the word that is used to refer to the aliens in both Ezra and Nehemiah is a different word every single time than the word that's used here in Leviticus and everywhere else that God tells his people in Israel how to treat the alien among them, the stranger among them. It's an entirely different word because God is dealing at that point with two different groups of people. One that's threatening the livelihood of Israel, those people in Ezra and Nehemiah, and the faithfulness of his people. And the other where they're simply people living together peacefully with each other and actually benefiting from each other's presence. That's the Leviticus 19 passage, for example. And it caused me to understand, finally, that as I thought about these 12 million folks living here, they're not here destroying our culture. They're not here destroying our way of life. As Dr. Land has shared, as Robert has shared, they share our values for the most part. Those folks who overstayed their visas, they did that because they really like it here. They like this life. I want people here who like this life. There are some people who are here who are citizens who I would rather send someplace else. And these folks who came here across the borders, they're hardworking people. They share our values. They share our values more than a lot of our folks that, in our neighborhoods. They're not here to destroy our culture. They're, in fact, going to enhance our culture in many ways. For the most part, they're very God-loving people, very godly people, and they're going to contribute significantly to the life and the well-being of this nation if we will just give them a chance to do it. So there is no biblical guidance that would say, drive these people out, marginalize them, despise them, and to be cruel to them. There is everything in Scripture that tells us to love these folks like we love ourselves, give them a real chance, bring them out of the shadows, put them on a path to prosperity, and watch them bring a blessing to this land as they live among us and share this life with us. So, I took that biblical journey, and that biblical journey brought me to the place of understanding that we need an immigration system, and we need to reform immigration in a way that puts these folks on a path toward legal status and also also gives them the opportunity, if they want it, to be citizens of this great nation. I think it's a win-win circumstance, and so that's why I'm supporting immigration reform.
Thank you. All right. I'd like to introduce Carloscampo. Carlos, as many of you know that you were here to watch him speak this morning, he's the president of Regent University. And in many ways, he's kind of the moral voice in my head when I try and think through these issues. And I fancy myself as somewhat of an author, of a writer. I've published. I've had over 70 articles that I've written on this issue published. But from time to time, I'm called to write an official statement for the hearing record, for example, in Congress, and I have to get it right. And so on those occasions, I send around what I've written to my friends here and said, do you have any ideas or comments? And Carlos, when he looks at what I've written and fixes it in a very kind way, it's just so much better. And it's the difference between some guy that's just a businessman that thinks he knows how to write and someone who's truly a professional and really knows what he's doing. And he's just been a marvelous partner in this. And I'd like to introduce my friend Carloscampo.
Thanks, Robert. Thank you all for being here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's a privilege to be with you and with this distinguished panel, men that I've come to respect deeply. So you won't be surprised as an English professor that I'm going to use the poem Mending Wall to frame a few comments for you. You may know this poem. I think you probably do. It's a Robert Frost poem, and even the title is this juxtaposition. You know, how can a wall mend? Mending wall. And I think, just in case you don't remember what's happening in the poem, it's springtime. So it's the right time of year. It's the same time of year as it is here now. It's springtime, and every year at spring, these two neighbors do what neighbors do if you have a wall that is made up of boulders, because in the winter they've now been strewn across. So it's springtime, so it's time to put the wall back up. It's something they do year after year after year. Well, the poem opens with this line: something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. And it goes on to describe that nature itself bubbles up and pushes this wall down as though the wall is unnatural. But before you come to that conclusion, the last line of the poem may be the most famous, and it is, good fences make good neighbors. Remember that? Good fences make good neighbors. So there's several elements of the poem that I think are interesting for this debate, right? Which is right? So which of those two positions is the right position? Do good fences make good neighbors? Or is there something unnatural about walls so that we should always want them down? I think about the juxtaposition that Richard talked about. One position is deportation, the other amnesty. One position is xenophilia, and the other is xenophobia. We can go back and forth on all of these juxtapositions that occur. One of the things that I go back to in the poem is that this is an habitual action. We do it every springtime. And finally, the narrator in this poem says, why? He asks the question, why? Why do we do it year after year? What is this wall between us? He says, I am all pines, and he is all apples. Part of what Barrett spoke to. Oh, wait a minute. My pines aren't going to go across and eat his apples. He says, you put up walls where there are cows. Here there are no cows. So this whole idea, are these folks here to eat our apples? Should we put up a wall here between these two groups? As Barrett said, there are other groups we need to wall out. But maybe not these groups, but more than any other single thing, this idea of habituation. And as an academic, I have to ask my students all the time, why? Don't just have a position. If you can't answer for why you believe what you believe, don't tell me what you believe. Let me ask you the question, why are you doing this year after year after year? And lots of folks come to me and say, Carlos, I understand your position on immigration reform, but you know my fear? My fear is we're going to come back here to the same point again, right? We're all hearing that. We were here in 1986 and we were made promises, and they said, oh yes, this will be the last time Reagan said it. We'll never have to do this again in America if we get this right. So they say, isn't this simply going to send a message to prospective immigrants across the country? See what America does. They comply. They bend. They love you so much because of their Christian roots that in time they will bend and grant you passage into their country. I think very differently about this issue. If you knew nothing else about this panel except the first names of each of the panelists, Robert, Barrett, right? Richard, and Carlos, right? So that's all you know about the panelists. Which of these four does not belong? No, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say that. But you'd say, well, we know which of those four believe in immigration reform. It's got to be the Carlos guy. Right, he's got skin in the game. It's probably 15 of his family members that are just waiting for some bill to pass so that, right? So here, see all the things you're saying? All you know about me is my name. All you know, why I entered this debate is precisely because of that reason. You know, it's not an academic issue for me. It's a very personal issue because one of the things that I've seen in the sweep of history is we have this tendency, not as Americans, but as human beings, that all I need to know about you, tell me this, tell me your name, tell me your religious affiliation, tell me 2 or 3 things and I'll tell you who you are. Right? That's all I need to do. We distill and reduce humanity to something less than human. The objectification of humanity leads to pogroms and disaster. Period. There's a simple philosophical equation that has been true in history. It's this idea that what happened with Nazism didn't begin with the Nazis. Some say it began when folks made jokes about Jews and laughed. You made a joke about another class of people and said, you know what? How'd you get the Grand Canyon? A Jew lost a quarter. Right? So there's the joke. People laugh. That's funny. And then something is embedded in your psyche that says, they're not exactly like me. And before long, it seemingly in less than a generation, not only are you not like me, you're not human at all. Because I can't do what we did to that people, to that race of people, if you think they're human. You can't do that to your brother. You can't say, this is my neighbor, and exterminate your neighbor. You have to convince a people that these aren't human beings at all. So the things that you're killing aren't human. And when I heard the way that my brothers, okay, their names, a lot of them were Carlos and Jose, but God help me, I don't think it would have mattered. They began speaking about the disease they brought to America and the crime and the deviousness and the way they were stealing and they were lazy. And these people, we grouped them together and we used a word like alien to define brothers. And if that's a liberal philosophy, God help me. Because as Barrett made clear, Jesus went to the Samaritan woman at the well. She had already been defined in one way, right? She was defined in one way. I am an adulteress. That's who I am. That's why I come to the well at noon, knowing no woman will be here and certainly not a man. I come alone at noon because I don't want to see another soul, because I've already been defined in this community and they told me who I am. There's an English guy for you. But my point, her testimony, which again is partially our testimony at some level, her testimony was remarkable. And she became certainly the first woman evangelist, one of the great evangelists in the world. But her testimony was simple yet profound. It was this: he told me all the things that I have done. She repeats it twice. Scripture tells us twice that was her testimony. He tells me all the things that I have done. See, the world has told me one thing that I have done over and over and over and over again until I'm not human anymore. I'm just an adulteress. That's all I am. But he came and told me all the things that I've done. All the things that I have done. And spoke life. That's what the Messiah does. So while this is an important issue for me, it's an ancillary issue to the more important issue of all. And it is that we are a nation that respects the rule of law because we respect the God that said, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. And it's important to me what Caesar says about this issue. It's more important to me what God says about this issue. And if I play any role in this debate, in this discussion, in these issues, I hope it's a role that brings us back to Christ again to say, how would Christ respond? How would he respond? How would he see us? How would he see these people? Would he group them together or would he see them as individuals? To me, it's one of the most defining things about his ministry and to us. Christ didn't just die for a body of believers. It was me. He knew my sin. He knew my past. and he sacrificed himself for me and for these strangers as well. So that encapsulates why this is an important issue to me and why I stand where I stand. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Carlos. I really love what you said. All right, so as I promised, I want to open it up. I'm sure you have some questions, so let's get at it. And don't worry if they're tough questions. It's okay. Good.
So I have two questions. First one is, I've always been concerned with the E-Verify issue whenever this discussion has come up. You guys talked a bunch about the moral issues with why we're going about this, and I'm concerned that having employers be part of the police determining whether what should be happening here is going to be a moral issue. They're going to be coming between people coming in, and they're the ones supplying them the jobs. I want employers to be able to hire people without having to worry that they're doing something wrong. Historically, when you put restrictions into place, you create a black market. With prohibition and drugs and so on, you create a black market where if people can't get the job through the legal means, they'll go to an illegal means. They'll go to prostitution, drugs, gambling, all the different things that we have problems with. That's what happens, and a lot of these illegal immigrants or whatever, if they're still coming in, I'm worried that they're going to go to those things, and that we're actually going to have a worse situation in terms of national security than if we just kind of got rid of the E-Verify, let them work undocumented and handle any types of issues using some other means that maybe still restricted jobs, I don't know, but that wasn't such a moral issue with the corporations where they created a black market. Second one is similar. Historically, we've had lots of discussions about the economic problems of bringing illegal immigrants in. They're going to be taking our jobs and stuff like that. I'm not concerned about that. Typically, like we've said before here in the panel, they're a boon to our economy. We need them coming in. They do jobs that Americans aren't willing to do at wages that Americans aren't willing to take. But we're dealing with politicians here. That language is still going to be in the bill. I want to know how that's being dealt with because I want as much of it to be removed from the bill as possible. So 2 questions.
Okay.
As you respond to those questions, would you repeat, at least encapsulate the question for the tape? That's one of the things, because this is being recorded, we want to make sure that each question gets spoken into the microphone.
Okay. Well, basically, first to the E-Verify issue, he's worried that an E-Verify program would tend to force some people in desperate situations to still come to this country, but work in a sub-economy, perhaps doing nefarious things because they couldn't work legally. Well, I'll take a whack at it. You've got a point. Okay, you've got a point. What I would say is this: most of the people that come want to work. They're coming to work, basically. And as he sort of said, we give them our worst jobs at our worst pay, and they take it gratefully because it's much better than they could do in their home country. And I've been to many of these countries, and I see the abject poverty and corruption and working conditions that they're escaping from. The way it's set up right now in this country, employers do have to, by de facto, be somewhat of a stopgap, somewhat of a policeman, as you say, because you're supposed to see somebody's driver's license and social security card. If you can get a driver's license and social security card, you can hire them. And being an employer in Los Angeles for almost 30 years, I know that that's what we did. But I also know that beyond that, the fact of the matter is that on any street corner in Los Angeles, or on many street corners, you can buy a driver's license for $100. You can buy a 1930s era social security card, which we have not updated since the 1930s, for maybe $75, and it's going to have somebody else's social security number or a made-up social security number on it. But as an employer, you've done your due diligence. You've done what you're supposed to do, and then these people are going ahead and working. And I also know, or I think I know, that in California, in small and medium businesses, probably half the people that are working in manufacturing, like I was, are probably not legal, but they have the documents to prove it. So how do you solve that problem? I think that it's a difficult moral decision to make. But at some point, you have to make some difficult decisions, or we're not going to solve this problem. And it seems to me that the best solution that they've come up with is to make sure that people, first of all, that are here are who they say they are. And secondly, that they are, in fact, legally entitled to work either as a citizen or as a legal resident or as someone who is authorized under a work visa to come in here and work. Look, it's not going to be a perfect a perfect solution. There's going to be problems with it, but you have to start somewhere. We have to find practical solutions for all these very intractable problems. And it seems to me that the issue of trying to do E-Verify is the best thing that I've heard. And if someone come up with a better mousetrap, I'm certainly open to hearing about it.
Tell them about the, under this new bill, you would get something much more difficult to counterfeit than a Social Security card or a driver's license. You would have to have a tamper-proof biometric identity card that you would get at the time you register. You come forward and tell them who you are, undergo the background check, pay a fine. Part of the fine, it would be used to give them a biometric tamper-proof identity card, which would be impossible to counterfeit. It says who you are and it's got biometrics on it that make it impossible to counterfeit. Then you can hold you've given the employer a much better way to verify who should be working and who shouldn't be working. And if they aren't able to work, if they don't have it, we can deport them. I mean, if they don't pass the criminal background check, they're taking a risk. If they come forward and we find out they've got a criminal background, they're going to be deported. Or if they try to work without the tamper-proof card, they'll be arrested and deported. It will have a side benefit of probably increasing wages at the lowest level by about 12%. That's the estimate of what it costs us as a country to have people working illegally at substandard wages and being exploited by unscrupulous employers. And of course, a 12% rise is a pretty significant rise to people who are living at subsistence level. It will also increase tax. We will have an increase in tax revenue when you bring these people into the society, and they're not working in the black market anymore. It will increase tax revenue significantly. By the way, you know who's made out better than anybody else with the current system?
Federal government.
The federal government. It's estimated that the bogus Social Security payments that have gone into the Social Security system under fake numbers and under other people's numbers has increased the viability of the system for at least 3 years.
It's about $150 billion.
About $150 billion. The federal government actually is making money off of illegal immigration. The state governments is pretty much a wash because of sales taxes and stuff. It's the local governments that are getting hammered by illegal immigration because of the impact on schools and the impact on hospitals, et cetera, from the undocumented. And they're the ones who are really getting hit financially.
Yeah, and I know you had a second question, but we only have maybe about 5 or 10 minutes left, so I'd like to. Okay. Good.
Just quickly, a little bit of a statement and a quick question. Yes. My biggest concern, and I think a concern of some others, is assimilation. I don't have any trouble with them being here. I love them being here. I think it's great. That's what happens. That's how America grows and all that. There's so many things we can learn. We can learn from them, from their culture. Our question is, when they come here, are they going to be takers? Are they going to be givers? Are they going to grow with us? Are they going to help build America? Are they going to take from American people? Are they going to all go on the rolls and start taking welfare? I don't believe that's going to happen.
Right.
I believe there will be a percentage. I believe that that's a natural thing. There will be a percentage that will be takers. But my question is to the Republican Party, what in the world are we going to do to get in to show them the American dream? We can't even show it now to the people who are here that are voters. So with a bunch of new people coming in, what is it that we can do to get into the Hispanic community and start showing them not only do we want them, we want to assimilate. it challenges me a lot when I see them flying their flag all over the place. A Mexican flag or something in some of the different areas that I've seen in California. So I understand that's only a small percentage. But that bothers me, to learn our language, to be a part, to pay their taxes, to do the things that an ordinary citizen has to do, is my question. And what in the world is the Republican Party going to do? I think it may have to be more grassroots to get into the community and teach them the American dream. That you can have a house, that you can have 2 cars and a driveway. If you can't find a job, that you can start your own company.
Right.
You know, that's wild.
Just to repeat the questions for the microphone. Basically, he's talking about assimilation, and particularly in terms of the Republican Party. What can we do to make sure that these people assimilate into society and can fulfill what they came to do, which is to seek the American dream? And so, Barrett, if you have something to say,
Sure.
and then maybe Carlos.
Your question is manyfold. First of all, from the perspective of the immigrant, they may not assimilate, but they are going to integrate. They're not going to give up all of their values. You know, we don't ask any cultural group to give up all of their values, but they will integrate. Now, maybe not the first generation, but remember, a lot of these folks have been here so long, they're already fairly well integrated. They're just not really able to participate as much as they would like to. Their children are even more integrated, and those grandchildren are going to be totally integrated. Now, they're still going to be proud of their heritage. I'm proud of my heritage. Well, most of my heritage. And we all should be. We should be proud of our heritage. But these folks haven't demonstrated that they want to be marginalized. We've marginalized them. We make it really difficult for them to come out of enclaves. Once they feel more comfortable about coming out of enclaves, I feel confident that they will. The Republican question is a different question, and the Republicans are still figuring out how they're going to answer that question. If they go the wrong way on this, that's right. They're not going to participate. You know, if they actually think, and Sam Rodriguez and a couple of folks on the Hispanic panel shared this yesterday, if Republicans actually think that they can reach the Hispanic community and the immigrant community by doing 30-second ads on television and doing some parachute politics, they got it all wrong. The reason why Democrats get to these groups is because they have hundreds, thousands, probably tens of thousands of community groups already organized in those communities. And quite frankly, a lot of them are living off of federal grants and local government grants, and then they're also developing relationships in those communities. If Republicans actually want to share their vision and share with these folks what the American dream is really all about, they need to start rubbing shoulders, and they need to start creating these community institutions as well, so that they can live and move among these groups as well, and simply not to dictate to them from up high, which is happening too much at this point.
Right. Well, go ahead. You wanted to weigh in. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions.
I think I could have answered his question better. I'm an immigrant. And in 1956, my parents came from Cuba because they were starving, basically. And my mom was cousin to the president of Cuba before Batista, Rio Socarrás. So on my passport, it says Rosa Núñez Socarrás, which has given me a nightmare now to get my driver's license, even though I've had it here forever. My parents were hardworking people. My dad was a mechanic. First, they put him to wash cars at a dairy called Foremost Dairies. We couldn't speak a lick of English. You can imagine there not being any Spanish-speaking people in Miami. Oh, my dad had to come first all by himself and prove that he was a decent person before he could come. So every day my dad would ask the mailman, I want to see a lady for me. And the mailman would look at him kind of funny. The next day my dad would say, I want to see a lady for me. My dad wanted to know if the mailman had any letters from us from Cuba. So they got an interpreter to tell my dad that in this country, mailmen don't set up foreigners with women. They just children pick up a language like this. I mean, I remember learning to speak English watching American Bandstand and the Mickey Mouse Club. And anywhere my parents went, if they had to go buy a set of tires, we had to be the interpreter for them. I remember as a 10-year-old going to a doctor, and it was a Jewish doctor, and being the translator telling my parents what was wrong with me. And that Jewish doctor said to me, you know what? The communists can take away all your privileges, all your money, but what you bring here and you bring here, they cannot take away from you. And I just want to thank all these men, and like Carlos, that's the reason I came, because I heard you talk down there, and you know, you show Carlos, I show Rosa. I am so thankful to this country for what they have given us. The freedom, you know, to be able to feed my children every day, to be able to worship freely like this. You know, it's only people that have gone through what we have gone through in communism. The last time I was able to see my grandma, I was 9 years old. To not be able to get a picture from her, a letter from her, and to be shut out of your country, you feel, you know, I'm able to go to my husband to South Carolina and he can point to me, that's where my parents went to school, that's where I did this, that's where I did that. I have asked somebody that has gone to Cuba to bring me a little handful of soil, and they brought it to me in a little film container. I cherish that, and once in a while I'll take it out and put it in my hand. And I go and I pray. The verse that I claim for my country is, if my people that are called by my name will humble themselves and turn from their wicked ways, because there was a lot of wickedness in Cuba, a lot of santeria and a lot of, you know, just wrong stuff. And I think that God brought us here because I grew up in a different religion, and God brought us here to hear the good news, to hear the gospel. And a lot of us have become Christians in this free nation. And I just want to thank you all, and I just pray for every immigrant that wants to be part of this world, that they have an opportunity, and to do it correctly, and to do it legally, and to just be part of this great nation.
Amen.
Thank you.
Well, you know what? Let's just take one last question because we're kind of running over on time. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I think there's a bigger issue we also have to address, and that is, in this country, more and more we refer to it as a democracy and not as a republic. And the rule of law is becoming more and more an option rather than a requirement. So I look at the failure of laws as they're passed. First, they get delegated to somebody else to write. But they're huge documents that nobody can turn, like Obamacare. So how can you implement something which really is may never get to the daylight of reality? It's just another piece of paper, legislation that gets passed, and then it gets many exceptions associated with it. And when it hits the road, it never works.
Can I respond to that? Well, look, first of all, we are damaging. The rule of law is a very precious and a fragile thing. There are probably only about 4 countries in the world, maybe 4, where Bush versus Gore would have been settled as peacefully as it was in the United States. About a quarter of the population doesn't believe Bush won. Now, I think they're wrong, but they don't believe Bush won. But they accepted the Supreme Court's decision when it was made. That's the rule of law.
Yes.
And when you have your own government not enforcing the rule of law for 27 years, it damages all respect for the rule of law. Now, I read Obamacare. I read the whole bill.
Oh, God.
It took me a week, and I'm a fast reader, but it took me a week. I have not read the immigration bill. I read the summary. It's a much better written bill than Obamacare. It's has much more specificity to it. And for instance, on the trigger, It's not left to the federal government by itself. It's the Congress, and if they don't agree that the border's been secured, a border commission is set up of the 4 governors of the border states. I'd point out that 3 of those 4 right now are Republicans. The only outlier is Governor Brown, and also people appointed by the Congress to set when border security would be set in place. And nothing really takes hand other than these people being able to come forward and register and start the clock. Nothing really happens in terms of their progress toward full legal status and citizenship until the border is certified as secure. I think that look. All legislation has problems. Upton Sinclair said watching laws being made is like watching sausages being made, and it makes you not want to eat sausage. But the fact is, this is a major step toward restoring the rule of law by having an immigration system that is enforceable and fair and meets the needs of the United States. One of the things this bill does is it greatly increases the number of high-end immigrants that can come in. Our businesses are suffering because it's been 50 years since the majority of PhDs in math, physics, and chemistry from American universities have been native-born Americans. And we want those people to stay here. We want them to do their research here. We want them to do their work here. The country that's going to lead the world in the 21st century is the country that can get the biggest mass of brain power, wherever it was born, to do its work within its borders. This bill will tremendously help us to do that.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate you coming. I hope